From a doctor who stayed in the room after others left, I'm not the kind of doctor whose name you'd find in a best-selling book or on a television show. I don't run marathons or speak at conferences with dramatic spotlights. I'm just someone who has spent most of his adult life walking the quiet halls of nursing homes and small-town clinics, listening more than talking, holding the hands of people who used to be strong, and watching how life shifts when strength quietly leaves the room. What struck me the most over the years wasn't how illness arrives, but how easily people accept decline as fate. They'd look at me with tired eyes and say, "I guess this is just how it goes now," after a simple change like needing help to step out of the bathtub or struggling to carry groceries from the car. Not dramatic things, just little ones that begin to chip away at who they used to be. And often, by the time those little things showed up, something much bigger had already been happening beneath the surface. I once cared for a woman named Ruth. She was 74 and lived alone in the same yellow house she and her husband had painted decades earlier. When I first met her, it was because she'd slipped in her kitchen. Not fallen, just slipped. She didn't break anything, but she told me what scared her wasn't the moment she lost her balance. It was the moment after. The realization that she couldn't catch herself, that her body didn't respond the way it used to. It's like the part of me that always just worked quietly, she said, stopped answering. She hadn't been sick. She hadn't done anything wrong, but in that single moment, she started doubting whether she could keep living the life she had always managed on her own. That's when I started paying closer attention, not just to illness, but to strength, not to pain, but to what happens just before it. I learned something that many doctors, including myself for too long, didn't say out loud often enough, that muscle loss or sarcopenia doesn't wait for disease. It doesn't wait for bed rest. It begins early, moves quietly, and affects almost everyone after 60 unless we actively do something about it. Not because people are weak, but because no one ever told them muscle was something they'd have to protect, not just in gyms, but at the dinner table, in the quiet choices of everyday movement, in the forgotten power of walking, reaching, carrying. It wasn't until Ruth began asking questions that I truly began changing the way I practiced. She wanted to know what she could eat, to feel steadier, whether a glass of milk before bed helped, whether her walks down the driveway made any real difference. And the more I looked, the more I found studies that supported what I had suspected all along, that muscle is not a passive thing we lose as we age. It's an active force we can nourish, maintain, and even rebuild. I've seen 80-year-olds grow stronger. I've seen people who thought they were done learn to stand taller again. I've seen men and women regain the ability to rise from low chairs, to garden again, to hold their grandchildren with steady arms, all because they added a few things to their plate, a few movements to their day, and one very important shift to their mindset, the belief that their body is still listening. So if you're here wondering whether what you've lost is gone for good or whether it's too late to start, I hope you'll let me share with you what I've learned, not just as a doctor, but as someone who has sat quietly beside people at the edge of giving up and watched them take back more than they ever thought possible. Because strength doesn't disappear. It waits for you to return. Tatina, quiet choices that bring strength back. I've come to believe that strength doesn't return with loud gestures or heroic routines. It comes back through quiet choices, often so simple that they're easy to dismiss. I've seen this happen enough times now to know it's not coincidence. It's consistency. The patients who grew stronger didn't change their lives overnight. They adjusted gently, respectfully, and often with a touch of skepticism. But their bodies responded. One man I saw, Harold, started his return with nothing more than eggs. He hadn't eaten them in years. Something about cholesterol, he'd heard. But after a quiet conversation about protein and muscle signaling, he added 2 soft-boiled eggs to his breakfast. Within a month, he could get up from his low-slung armchair with far less effort. He smiled one morning and said, "I thought I was just getting used to old age. Turns out I was just underfeeding my legs. Eggs, especially whole ones, offer high-quality protein and leucine, which act like a green light for your muscles. And for seniors, that green light gets harder to switch on without help. Another woman, Marta, taught me something about what we eat before bed. She lived alone and had grown used to a small cup of tea and dry toast at night. I asked her to try something different, plain Greek yogurt, just a few spoonfuls before sleep. She was skeptical, but agreed. Months later, she told me she no longer woke up feeling so fragile, that her legs didn't feel like strangers in the morning. Casein, the slow-digesting protein in Greek yogurt, had done what no pill could. It nourished her muscles quietly through the night. It's not always about protein. Sometimes it's about blood flow, how well the nutrients actually reach the muscles. A retired violin teacher, Mr. Lang, once asked me if spinach was really as good as people said. I told him that greens like spinach and kale are less about protein and more about circulation. They're rich in natural nitrates, which improve how blood travels through aging vessels. He didn't care for salads, so he blended spinach into his morning smoothie instead. A few weeks later, he called to say his morning stiffness had lessened. "I still creak," he said, "but at least I'm not rusted shut." Then there's olive oil, simple, golden, and often misunderstood. A couple in their 70s who had once spent years avoiding fats began using olive oil again after we spoke. They drizzled it over their soups, dipped bread in it at lunch, and cooked with it at low heat. The wife had arthritis and feared inflammation, but over time her muscle tone improved and her hands regained steadiness. It turns out olive oil doesn't just help the heart, it quiets inflammation and improves insulin sensitivity, both of which play a role in how well muscles recover and rebuild. Of course, food alone isn't enough. At some point, you must ask your muscles to work, but that work doesn't have to look like a gym. I remember Mr. Paulson, a former school principal. He started with 5 sit-to-stands a day, using the arms of his dining chair. He said he did them after brushing his teeth, to keep the habit close to something familiar. After a few weeks, he increased to 10, then added slow steps up and down his front porch. His legs came back to life. It wasn't about reps or sets. It was about reminding his muscles they still had a job to do. Whey protein was something I once dismissed, thinking it was for bodybuilders, not older adults. But then I met Mrs. Carter, who had survived cancer and was trying to rebuild her strength. She had no appetite for large meals, but I asked her to try adding a scoop of whey protein to a fruit smoothie. Her strength gains were slow, but steady. She began walking farther, standing longer. The science supports it. Whey digests quickly and delivers amino acids that aging muscles need but don't respond to as readily. And then there are beans and lentils, unremarkable in appearance, but quietly powerful. A widower named Elias told me he ate mostly toast and crackers after his wife passed. I suggested lentil soup, something warm, familiar, and gentle. Over time, his stamina improved. Beans don't just offer protein. They provide magnesium, iron, and resistant starch that supports gut health. And a healthy gut, it turns out, supports strong muscles. Nuts and seeds have helped many of my patients snack smarter. One woman with arthritis in her hands found that shelled walnuts and a few pumpkin seeds made for a satisfying, nutritious midday snack. Magnesium, zinc, vitamin E, these all matter, especially when the goal is not just strength but resilience. Lastly, I remember a quiet moment with an old friend who was a retired painter. He said his hands had grown unsteady and his legs less sure. I asked him what fruits he ate, and he shrugged. I mentioned berries. He said they were expensive, but he liked them. We talked about frozen ones. A month later, he told me he'd been adding them to his oatmeal every morning. They taste like color, he said. But more importantly, he felt sharper. Berries protect not just the brain, but the very engines of our muscle cells, the mitochondria. They help repair. They help recover. None of these changes required a gym. None of them required perfection. They just required intention. And maybe that's the part I hope people remember most. Strength doesn't return because you chase it. It returns because you tend to it, gently, steadily, patiently. Through the food you choose, the way you move, the belief that your body is still willing to meet you, if you're willing to meet it halfway. One of the gentlest changes I ever saw a patient make came in the form of a teacup. Mrs. Yamada, a retired librarian in her late 70s, was the kind of woman who chose silence carefully and moved through the world with slow intention. She didn't like pills, and she didn't have much of an appetite. "But I enjoy a warm drink," she said. I asked if she drank green tea, and she nodded. "Only when I'm worried," she admitted. I smiled and told her that might be the best time for it. Because green tea, long regarded as a simple comfort, carries inside it something rather extraordinary, a compound called EGCG, known for its ability to reduce inflammation and support cellular health. What makes this remarkable isn't just the science, although it is sound. It's the way something so subtle can make a meaningful difference in how your body responds to the wear and tear of aging. Chronic low-grade inflammation is one of the great quiet thieves of strength in older adults. It dulls recovery. It weakens the repair systems, and over time, it slows everything down without ever shouting for attention. Green tea doesn't cure that, but it softens it, it calms it. And when taken regularly, especially in the morning or early afternoon, it gently encourages your metabolism to do what it already knows how to do, restore balance. Mrs. Yamada began drinking 2 cups a day, no sugar, no milk, just the tea and a moment to herself. Over time, her joint stiffness eased. Her digestion improved. She told me her hands felt less cloudy. I don't think she meant that in a clinical way, but I understood. The fog had begun to lift. Sometimes medicine comes dressed like ritual. What I've learned through all of these stories is that food is never just fuel. For older adults especially, it is a message to the body. You're still being cared for. You're still worth the effort. And when that message is repeated gently, day by day, the body listens. Strength doesn't return all at once. It returns in fragments. More ease in the morning, less fear on the stairs, a moment of balance where there used to be wobble. And those fragments, gathered patiently, become something whole again. I've watched it happen too many times to doubt it. When strength stops asking for permission. In my years as a doctor, the patients who changed me most weren't the ones with dramatic conditions. It was the ones who walked in quietly, told me nothing hurt, and yet described a life that was slowly slipping out of their hands. They weren't sick in the way the textbooks define illness, but they were losing something vital, something not measured by blood tests or imaging scans. They were losing their strength, and they didn't even know it. One of those people was Helen, a retired nurse in her mid-80s. She lived alone, took care of her garden, baked on Sundays, and liked to say that keeping busy was the secret to staying young. I met her after a fall. Not a dangerous one, she insisted. She had tried to close a window that had blown open during a windy afternoon. She shifted her balance, and her legs didn't catch her. She slid to the floor. She didn't break a bone, but she couldn't get back up. And that, more than anything else, frightened her. It wasn't the fall. It was the silence in her muscles, the absence of response from a body she'd trusted for more than 8 decades. "I didn't feel old until that moment," she said, eyes lowered, as if confessing something private. And I knew exactly what she meant. That's the part most people don't talk about. That loss of strength is not just a physical condition, it's an emotional reckoning. It's the moment you go from doing things without thinking to wondering if you still can. And for many, that moment happens far earlier than it needs to, because the truth is, most people don't lose their independence due to illness. They lose it because of quiet, unspoken weakness, the kind that makes you hesitate before rising from a chair, the kind that makes you stop reaching, stop walking, stop trusting your body one small decision at a time. For years, we in the medical world emphasize numbers. heart rate, cholesterol, sugar levels. But no one told people to watch their strength, to eat with muscle in mind, to move not for weight loss, but for preservation. By the time I started seeing the signs clearly, by the time I began noticing how often small falls were really about lost muscle, it was clear that something needed to change. And the most hopeful part, it can. Muscle doesn't judge you for being 75 or 80. It doesn't care when you start. What it needs is presence, attention, a little effort repeated gently and consistently. After that fall, Helen didn't enroll in any program. She didn't hire a personal trainer. What she did was far more powerful. She began standing up from her kitchen chair 5 times each morning, slowly, using the edge of the counter for balance. She added a spoon of yogurt to her breakfast, a little protein at dinner, a slow lap around her block after lunch. It didn't change her overnight, but over time, she could feel something returning. Not youth, not speed, but confidence. That's what I've learned matters most. Not the idea of getting strong, but the ability to stay in your own life, to do the things that matter to you on your terms, with as little help as possible. That's what muscle gives back. It's not about being fit. It's about being able to carry your laundry basket without fear, about knowing you can get down on the floor with your grandchild and get back up again without needing a hand. If you've reached a point in life where things feel heavier, not just physically but emotionally, I want you to know it doesn't have to stay that way. The most dangerous thing about losing strength is how quietly it happens, but the most powerful thing about regaining it is how quietly it begins. A good meal, a short walk, a single decision to move a little more today than yesterday. You don't need to be perfect. You only need to begin. The quiet power that changes everything. There comes a point, somewhere beyond youth and middle age, when strength begins to mean something different. It's no longer about lifting heavy things or running fast. It becomes about standing tall when the world expects you to sit down, about moving freely through a room filled with memories, about keeping the quiet dignity of doing things on your own. In those moments, muscle is no longer muscle. It's the last thread connecting your independence to your daily life. And what makes that truth so easy to miss is how silently it slips away. No pain, no warning, just small changes that add up. A step becomes slower, a bag feels heavier. Then one day, reaching the second floor seems harder than you expected, and you begin adjusting your life around what your body can no longer do. But the part no one tells you, the part that matters most, is that this isn't permanent. Your body still listens, even now. It still responds when you move, when you feed it well, when you treat it like it matters. Strength may fade, but it can also return, one quiet act at a time. And that return, no matter how slow, is everything. Because what's truly at stake is not just your body, but your ability to live with the same grace, freedom, and self-respect you've earned. So if today you feel weaker than yesterday, know this: it is not too late. You're not too far gone. And your strength is still within reach.